When I look at history and read through history textbooks and try to make meaning out of what history is, I can't help but concluding that human history is quite often governed by pain and by man's desire to make meaning out of pain, right? For example, humanity creates religious institutions, superstitions, and deities in order to try to make meaning out of human pain or human suffering, to give that human suffering a purpose, right? I would say on a similar line, or as this, almost of a parallel view of history, there have always been a few, right? A few people who have ruled over the many. And often, those few people who rule over the many are those who are more corrupt, more decadent, and more hateful than the many. They also may be more intelligent or more savvy, being able to figure out how to manipulate religion or superstitions or deities in order to fool the many, right? When the many are ignorant and uneducated, right? When they're Simon Legree's, for instance, you can use superstition to cause them to think a certain way, even to sometimes to govern them, right? In so much of, for instance, the Middle Ages, there was such superstition and that it was able to be used by certain people, the Catholic Church, for instance, to maintain a power hold over the rest of the society, it seemed, right? Superstition was a way, to dominate. But these people, these few people who held such power in society, you could say they're the wolves, in a way. If metaphorically speaking, they're the wolves. And they view most of the human population, most human beings, as nothing more or nothing less, really, than sheep, right? But if these wolves view most of their fellow human beings as sheep, then they think that these sheep, right, can be exploited for the benefit of the wolves, right? But they don't see the sheep as human beings. They see themselves as human beings, although they see themselves as a particular savvy kind of human being, right? Almost illuminated in some way because they aren't like those stupid sheep. They understand how the way the world really works, and so they keep the sheep in a nice state of docility. And these wolves, take almost as their motto, right, their mantra in a way, that the world is for the strong and not the weak. I mean, that's kind of my own summary of it. But the idea that, look, the world is a struggle, it's a battle, and somebody has to come up out on top. And we plan to be the ones that come out on top. We plan to be the ones that win, right? And we will therefore do what we need to do in order to make sure we come out on top. And honestly, if the goal is coming out on top, how we get on top is less important, right? We can cheat our way to the top. We can lie our way to the top. We can use violence in order to get to the top. It doesn't really matter how we get to the top. We still don't have to follow some, rule book, right, where we follow all these different rules in order to somehow get to the top, and everybody to get to the top just follows those rules. Of course not. To get to the top, those people who get there often break so many rules or bend those rules to the point where, well, they should be breaking. Now, whether they can convince the system that they're just really bending the rules, but they're not actually breaking them, maybe they'll be successful there. But they are, for all essential purposes, breaking the rules. Because all they're concerned about is getting to the top. That's their goal, and whatever means by which they need to take in order to get there, they will take that path. And these few, who are so desirous to hold the power, right, desirous to exert their will over other people, they often get to that position where they can assert their power, where they can manipulate the masses, and then they do tell the masses of who they consider to be sheep. They tell those masses how to think, how to behave, and they become the tyrants who use religion, they use patriotism in order to control the masses. And I'm sure that they use other things besides religion and patriotism, but those are two major mind control processes that they use to control the people. And they may also use certain drugs and certain foods in order to really hurt the minds of other people, right? The minds of the sheep, right? So that those sheep can't even think for themselves, right? Or are so drugged up that they're not able to use their mental power. But it seems to me that when I look at the world around me and I see the world that exists, that it is true that most people are sheep. And there are these wolves that rule over the sheep. But there are also a few people who are neither wolves nor sheep. And they do understand the agenda of the wolves. They know what the wolves want to do. They know the wolves control the media. They know the wolves buy human beings, right? Like, say, Bill O'Reilly, perhaps, right? To whore their wolf-like agenda. That they create advertisements, right, on TV that are in themselves a form of mind control. Buy a product you don't need and don't even want. And lots of people do buy things that they're not even going to use in life. That's a form of mind control that's being created by the wolves. Right? We just think it's okay because it's called advertisements, right? But it's really a sense of mind control, right? You create the advertisement so people will buy something they otherwise wouldn't buy, and it's not by objectively presenting that information, like by talking, somebody saying, buy this drink or something, right? And talk about the fact that its ingredients are strawberry puree, apple juice, banana puree, orange juice, natural flavors, which in itself doesn't tell much, because first off, natural flavors doesn't necessarily mean organic. But it's not some objective analysis, right? They'll put this in the hands of some athlete, or they'll do certain things with it in order to appeal to certain psychological wants and needs. So it's not an objective sale, right? It's not simply telling you that this product exists. It's getting you to buy the product because of linking it to something psychological, right? Wolves also buy sheep and keep sheep docile through welfare payments and government handouts, so that the really stupid, or at least misinformed, sheep are very content to maintain their status as sheep, right? They'll say, what, I was always a sheep. I never had, what I needed to have to go out and get a good job to really empower myself. I've always been a lowly sheep, and I don't want to try to improve my life or understand the way the world really works. I don't want to do any of that. I'm just content to be a sheep. Just give me my welfare payments and I'll eat those chips and cookies in front of my TV and, continue, my climb up the obesity chart, right? I'll be that decadent human being that is fat, that is, a TV addict who just wants to eat the chips and cookies and has no desire to exert his or her will and to try to just become even a good human being, right? Who is physically fit, mentally conditioned, understands the world around him. I don't want to be any of that. I'm just content to be that sheep. And then wolves also use sheep, right, to control other sheep. And I think about certain police forces, right? They think that they are part of a wolf ruling elite because they get to exercise power over other sheep. We get to slam that sheep's head into the sidewalk because, we've arrested him for smoking some marijuana. We get to show our power. So you have the police as one of these agents of the wolves, right? Who are really, again, still sheep, because they're going to get their pension funds robbed most likely at the very end, right? And so once they're no longer useful to the wolves will get rid of the police, or at least they'll think about ways that the police won't be able to threaten their power. But they're still often sheep, because most police officers are not particularly intellectually gifted, right? There are new studies about people that wanted to become police officers that were denied because they had too high of an IQ, right? They want an IQ about 105 to 115. That's what they're looking for. 100's fine as well. If you get over 125 or 130, they don't want you in the police departments, right? They don't want you talking about civil rights and equal justice and habeas corpus and thinking about how you shouldn't be going out and maybe arresting people for offenses that they're only committing against themselves. Why, in other words, why do we have all these drug laws so the people who are, say, smoking marijuana get thrown into prison? But at the same time, nobody's faulting the corporations that are creating all these products using all these chemicals that are, even as far as I'm concerned, adequately tested after they've also bought the administrators in the Food and Drug Administration. So in other words, people in the Food and Drug Administration are going to go along with the big corporations who want to market some new product, even if it's not tested as well as it should be, because they've been bought and paid for. So then you get all these drugs and all these chemicals, right? Aspartame, I think, is still a great example, that have a real propensity to affect the human body in some way or other. Certainly lots of the candies and cookies and chips and other things that people put into their bodies, right? And do so because, again, they're sheep. They don't understand what these products do to their bodies. Maybe a few of them are sheep and they do in fact know, and they say, yeah, I want to become obese. But I think a lot of people, that's not their intent. And I don't know many people who want to be obese. They may say that because they don't want to acknowledge that they're overweight, but or that they're being overweight is a result of a lack of self-control. But there are a lot of people who I think have no idea what they're consuming. Even if they try to read the label on the back of a product, they have no idea what those different substances mean. So in other words, they are very much like sheep, right? But because the corporations are marketing these junk foods to the people are certainly, free to consume as much of these horrible foods as they want. But if they try to consume any pot, right, any marijuana, even though it's probably not nearly as dangerous to one's health as some of these junk foods, then we'll take that person and slam their head into the sidewalk, right? Not like, one needs marijuana in life to survive, but it's one of those hypocrisies, right? We're going to make illegal something that isn't that bad for you, and then at the same time we're going to have all these other things that are so much worse. Sure, take them all you want, right? We'll drug you up on 9 different medications. Some child who has some behavioral problems, right? We'll put them on all kinds of medications, but if it's a 16-year-old or 17-year-old that isn't on basically any medications, or maybe no medications at all, and he just smokes that joint, oh dear, slam his head into the sidewalk and throw him in juvie. I mean, that kind of attitude, right? And so you see those kinds of dynamics, and really, I mean, the wolves are people who want to keep the majority of the masses in a state of being sheep, right? Because it benefits the wolves and the interest of the wolves. Because the wolves are, generally speaking, people who are like, many bankers are wolves, many corporatists are wolves, many other rich people are wolves because they're rich, right? They have a very good life. They don't have to worry about feeding themselves, right? They're going to be able to buy the best food on the market. They're going to be able to get, the best medical advice. They're going to be able to afford, definitely, to treat their water, right? That they have a filtration system for their water, so they're not drinking the impurities that are very often in the water, and when it's industrial grade water. They're going to be able to have the best health. I mean, and often they don't even have that bad of a job. Some of them don't even need a job because they have so much money that they're continually making off of other people's work. So they have, their investments fuel them a 7-figure income, right, without even working. So, those are some of the wolves. And, the sheep, if they rose up and said, why is it that some people get to make 7-figure incomes without even working simply based off their assets? Then, the wolves become very, very angry at that. And they're like, how dare you question capitalism, right? Our corporate capitalist system. We don't have to work because our great-great-grandfather made lots of money so that we have investments that are fueling our family through generations, right? And you little sheep, you're supposed to be content being a sheep. You're supposed to be content not knowing how we function and how capitalism functions, our corporate capitalism. This is no Jeffersonian capitalism that I'm talking about, no small agrarian capitalism. It's a capitalism where a few people almost become aristocrats, and the rest of the population, gets to be the peasantry, right? And gets to eat the horrible foods that are not good for their health, obtain a very minimalistic education, through a public school system, and really not know very much at all of what's going on in the world, and how to, be healthy and improve their life, because the jobs that are available for them are like, welcome to McDonald's kind of jobs, right? They're not the good jobs. Sometimes they're jobs where you're wage slaves, shuffling paperwork for 8 hours a day for some, health insurance company or something else like that. But there are not many really good jobs left, right? Because most of the jobs are jobs where you get, you have people working really, really diligently under the illusion that they work really, really diligently. They'll maybe move up the corporate ladder, right? You fry those frozen cow parts really well at McDonald's. Maybe someday you'll be able to own your own McDonald's, right? That kind of attitude, as if that's like a great aspiration, right? To own your own fast food restaurant where you can help, make people unhealthy, because that's what fast food is, right? It's mostly junk that people are putting into their bodies. So, what an aspiration. What an aspiration that if you do your job really well for 20 years as a secretary, maybe you'll get to move up to be, one class higher than a secretary. I don't know what that would be, an over-secretary or something, right? Or maybe you're the under-secretary and you get to move up to the secretary, right? Wow, what a wonderful life, right? Working so hard for a job that isn't maybe even very necessary for society to even have in the first place. But working so hard in that job for what? Right, so you can come home from that job and sit in front of your TV and watch TV. So you can come home from that job and, be so tired that you just go to sleep after eating some junk food meal. Right? What a life. What a life. Or maybe you have a job where you're actually making, you're making something, but you're working for a corporation, so you work diligently for 8 hours that day for $12 an hour, and the other, say, $12 or $14 of profit that you made goes up to the up the corporate ladder, so that most of it goes to shareholders, or your boss gets a little bit of it, as he's watching over you to make sure you do your job the correct way. That's the capitalist system. It's this system where wolves rule over sheep. And even when human beings stand up against the wolves and say, look, you're abusing sheep and you're also abusing us. We're not sheep, but we're not wolves, we're just human beings. Well, then the wolves, tell the sheep that we human beings are being conspiracy theorists, right? It's ingenious, right? And the sheep, because they are sheep very often, and they don't want to question what they've been taught. They don't want to, question their reality. Is almost every great human being in history, right? Walt Whitman and many others. I'm trying to remember all the names. I think Thomas Jefferson as well. He said once, question, even the existence of God. But, the other thing there is, what that would also mean is question everything, right? Question all things, even the things that you've believed to be absolute. Make sure they're the truth. Don't just believe what you've been taught. Just don't, cling on to those old superstitions or those old cultural norms, right? Don't, be the kind of person that Burke wants you to be and just, my father was a peasant, I'll be a peasant kind of attitude. Don't assume that because your parents were something that you can't be better than that. Or you can't be more than that. And don't assume that because, people that you knew, adults believe in God, that means that there is a God. Or don't assume that because your parents were Republicans that you should be Republican or something like that. Not like the Democratic Party's doing a very good job recently either, because they're not. They're also bought and paid for, I think, as far as I can tell, by most Democrats are bought and paid for by corporate interests, right? Banking interests. But you be the person, who goes out and investigates for yourself. Don't let yourself be a sheep. Don't let yourself be taken advantage of by wolves. Unite with other sheep, right? And realize that there aren't that many wolves. And if sheep stood together, they could run the wolves off the side of cliffs. The wolves, as bad as they are, and as many as they could probably kill some of the sheep, they could never, one wolf that has 500 sheep come at it can't kill all 500 sheep before those 500 sheep knock that wolf off the cliff. So, don't be the sheep that believes you can't stand up to the wolves. Unite with other sheep, and look at your fellow sheep as human beings, right? And don't see them as sheep. Wake up from your status of being sheep into the status of being human beings, and then you'll really, if you unite together, be able to challenge the wolves, because the wolves don't like human beings with guns. They like sheep. And if there's a lot of human beings uniting together and they have firearms, the wolves really are afraid of that. That's why the wolves don't like, human beings who have firearms. They prefer sheep, because sheep don't want to. They're content grazing in the pasture, right? Getting themselves sheared all the time, right? And then eventually becoming lamb chops. That's the kind of human beings that the wolves like. But if you become, if you preserve a sense of humanity and you become one in solidarity with other human beings, right, and you overcome all the differences that the wolves try to create for you, like, for instance, religious differences or sexual identity differences or class differences, or let's say race differences. There's so many differences that the sheep are supposed to believe must divide them from other sheep, right? That are all created and maintained by the wolves because they like sheep fighting with one another, right? Getting in their little disputes over, who gets to have this little piece of pasture, right? The wolves love that because that keeps the sheep fighting amongst themselves in little sheep disputes, while the wolves get to go and, exploit all the sheep. And shear all the sheep and eventually make all the sheep into lamb chops. And that's what they like. It's not really that hard. That's what history would teach you. That's what history should teach you about the way that the world functions, about how the world is run and who runs the world. And, and if you can't recognize that, then there's a problem. But also the other thing you want to think about from history is all the injustices through history, right? Because that's one of the great ways of defeating a Burkean traditionalism. Because if you look at the past and you see all the injustices of the past, you see all the exploitations of the past, exploitations in the 1920s of workers, being wage slaves, even children working in factories getting beaten by some basically overlord if they're not producing enough, right? In 1800 to 1860, the slavery in the South of people, right, who were supposedly black, right? Although, is somebody black when they're 1/8 black? They were still slaves if you're 1/8 black. But the point here is that these so-called black people as slaves. Well, what does that say about your, the past and the injustices of the past? If you believe that human beings should know one another, then you think that's definitely an injustice of the past. What does that say then about religion? What does that say about a world in which religion reigns? What does that say religion's good, right? If religion tolerates it, or at least Southern religion did, right? What about, wars that have been the church supported, right? The church didn't go out against by any means, and many people who were Christians within the church personally had that great patriotic, fervor. What does that say about the discernment of some of the Christians, right? So, I mean, if you see Christians as just people who, even if they truly have some conviction toward their religious sentiment, may very well be wrong in their, they may be wrong. There may be some Christian who truly believes that the gay people are going to destroy the world, but that doesn't mean that they are. That Christian may simply be delusional. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm much more concerned about bankers than I am about, somebody whose sexual identity leads them to want to live their life with someone of the same sex. I mean, come on, that's not going to destroy the world. It might destroy the wolves' world, right? Because the wolves like traditional families. They like, Willy Loman's going out and working diligently for 30, 40 years to support their children and then being able to be discarded. They like that, right? They like men going off and working slave labor jobs to make corporations money. That makes them happy. But when, you're somebody who doesn't have a family to support, doesn't have children to support, if you're just a single man, right, or you're some single man living with some other single man and you don't have any children to support, that they don't like that. Because instead of going out and working that job, you might decide, hey, look, why don't we all get together and form some union, right, and say, look, we're not going to be your slave anymore. We're not going to work for nothing for your corporation anymore. We're going to be human beings, and we're going to demand at least a living wage. And no, we're not going to eat that, fucked up food you give us that is basically not even food, and it's going to make us fat. We're not going to do that. It's not that we love our lives so much here on earth, but we don't want to live like pigs on earth or like sheep on earth. We want humanity, and we want a body that looks like, it's a human body, right? And we're not, 400 pounds, with an IQ of 84 because of all the junk we put into our body that has just destroyed our minds. We don't want to be that kind of a person in the society. And we don't buy into all your work hard and you can rise up the corporate ladder junk anymore. Because even if we do rise up the corporate ladder, we just get a job where our assignment is to help manipulate sheep. Or you get a job hired in the corporation in an advertising division, your job is still to manipulate the sheep below you, right? You're almost just like the police, right? Your job is to keep sheep down. And that's what capitalism's about, right? The wolves keeping sheep down. It's not that communism isn't about, a few wolves pretending to be sheep, right, in an equal sheep system, right, as I think Animal Farm would demonstrate. But at the same time, let's not be naive enough about capitalism and imagine that capitalism is about great equality, and a system by which, if you just work hard, you can get a great job, right? If you do, it's only because, you're hard enough working that the corporation thinks that you are going to make them more money. It's not because of you. The corporations don't care about you. They give you a better job. It's only because they think you're going to make them more money. It's not because of you as a person. It's not because of your humanity. It's not because they think of you as human beings. It's only because they think that, their profit revenue might increase if they give you a better position. And as, say Portnoy's Complaint, Philip Roth novel, one of the early chapters demonstrates, Alexander Portnoy's father works really hard for a company and they don't even give him a raise. Why not? Because they say to themselves, there's nobody that's going to be able to make as many sales in this district, in a poor, Negro district of New York, than Alexander Portnoy's father does. Right? So in some ways, working hard for a company may actually hinder your ability to increase, up the corporate ladder, because the corporation still feels that you're actually making them more money in the position that you're still at, right? And so, and Alexander Portnoy's father obviously had Alexander and Alexander's sister to take care of, right? And of course, he lived for his children and wanted to see, Alexander get married and have a child, right? So you see how that bourgeois system's being created and recreated, right? Alexander Portnoy's father wants Alexander to get married, wants Alexander to have children so that Alexander Portnoy's can be a grandfather, right? That's what the concern is. It's about perpetuating a bourgeois society so that you can perpetuate, a sense of contentment, a sense of, of saying, well, I would love to protest against injustices in society, but I have a family and I can't, risk something happening to my family. Right? And that can happen when you have children, for instance. One of the first things somebody can do to you to get you to shut up is come up to you and say, you love your children? Knock it off. Well, you won't have any children to love, right? That kind of attitude. So when you don't have children and you don't have a wife, what are they going to say? Knock it off or we're going to kill you. I mean, that's going to be really persuasive, especially if you don't care that much about your life. It's going to be like, oh, thanks for telling me what I already know. You don't have anybody you can kill that I care about, other maybe people in my union movement, maybe we're all together, we all care about one another, and we all want to make a better life for ourselves, but, we all knew what the risk was, right? We all knew what the risk was of standing up against you. So, you might kill, one of my friends here in the union movement, but we all knew, what we were fighting for. We all knew what risk we faced. So it's not like, I'm going to stop for that, right? You kill my little innocent children or something that have no understanding of what I'm fighting for, then that would be a strong motivation to stop fighting, right? To stop opposing the powers that be. So in a way, the traditional bourgeois family is a great way to keep people content with their subjugation and servitude under a Burkean model, right? So, that's also another wonderful thing from history that someone like Burke would teach us, right? How we're supposed to, how we're supposed to live this traditional life that keeps the power structure in place, right? Keeps the elites in place over top of everybody else and keeps everybody else down and in a state of subjugation and being content within their current existing state of subjugation. Right, so I think that's basically what I wanted to communicate when I'm talking about how I see history and what history is. And maybe this is a little different kind of history than you would get in most of your public, high school kind of history textbooks, because, of course, they wanted to create heroes out of certain, elite wolves and make these elite wolves out to be the great heroes of the society. But any, even consideration of, say, the event of Titanic, right? The sinking of the Titanic would show what happened. The wolves got off the ship. The sheep, they didn't, right? The wolves, the first-class passengers, and especially those first-class passengers who had money and influence, they got on the boats. Who didn't get off the Titanic? The people in second class, many of them, and definitely the people in third class, because the people in third class, why should they need to be saved? There are first-class people that aren't saved, right? So if you can just see the world in that different light, if you can see the class conflict and the class tensions, and you can see how, the wolves get the best education in the best universities, the wolves get to understand the world around them, the wolves can pay for that kind of training in this capitalist system, and the sheep remain in their state of servitude. If you can see that kind of history, then you can perhaps challenge it and fight up against it. Lose your sheepskin and become a human being, unite with other human beings, and together oppose the wolves that run the society.